Hey, this is Mark Goldberg from Mark Vlogs Watches, and today we're going to have a look at a couple of different Rolexes. And we're going to compare the newer style and the older style. We're going to compare. Okay, cut three. This is Mark Goldberg from Mark Vlogs Watches. Fuck it, let's start with a quick wristwatch check. It's the Sea Dweller, the 16660. Is that like an Antichrist watch? Oh God, I'm sorry I said that. Anyway, listen, let's talk about new style and old style Rolex. Let's do it now.
Here we have two watches by Rolex, and I want to compare them even though they're a different model. On the left here we have the model 16660 Sea Dweller. It's a 5-digit reference number. And on the right here we have a newer model. It's a GMT Master 2, and it's a 6-digit reference number as opposed to a 5-digit reference. And the reference number on this GMT is 1166710. So why am I showing you two different Rolexes? Well, and why are we going to compare them? They have some things in common. First of all, they are both in a Rolex Oyster case. That is the name of this case, and it is really the first of one of the first very effective waterproof casing. So both of these guys have got good water resistance, although this is a dive watch, so it has greater water resistance. Nonetheless, they're both perfectly water resistant enough for the average owner. They both of them have movable bezels, although this is 120 click dive bezel and this is got a 24-hour clickable dive bezel on it. They both have screw-in crowns. That's part of the dive resistance. They both have oyster bracelets. Of course, this has the GMT complication, but it's not really so much the movements that I want to talk about now. It is the other subtle differences between the older style Rolex and the newer style, and we can talk about that using these two watches as comparative examples of their era. Now, I really do like this Sea Dweller a great deal. It is a chubby watch. It has a helium release valve. It's kind of vintage at this point. It's extremely cool, and although this is not a brand new watch, it's modern production, modern dimensions, modern everything. Here's the funny thing. The camera angles are a little hard to gauge, but I'll tell you what, to the naked eye, this newer style watch looks more massive, although if you look at them from the perspective of thickness, this is the thicker watch because, like, look at that case back. That's a pretty thick case back, and this one is flat. So this is going to measure deeper. Also, look at how the crystal sticks up on the Sea Dweller. But what I want to focus on more is the dimension of the case. Here's the thing. This guy looks bigger, but both of them are 40 millimeters across in the width of the case. So these are both 40 millimeter watches. But what Rolex deduced was that the style was trending a lot more towards larger watches in the 42 to 44 millimeter range, and they didn't want to dramatically increase the case size of their average watch, I think. So what they did was they invented what's called the super case. This is a very typical case of, in fact, the Submariner case in the 5-digit reference number Submariners. It's virtually the same case. It's just not as thick because of the case back and the crystal. The movement is, the water resistance is less. On the Sea Dweller, it's a greater water depth resistance. But both these guys are 40 millimeters. So why does this watch look bigger? And that is because if you look at these lugs, look at these, but these lugs are narrow and elegant, and these lugs are wider, squat, and brawny. So to the eye, I feel that this has a more elegant look on the one hand. On the other hand, here you definitely get more metal on the wrist. So I will insert some photographs of both of these watches on the wrist, and then some side-by-side photographs also, so that you can get a little better comparison, and I'll put them in right here.
Here's a quick look at the Sea Dweller on the wrist. You'll get another view in a second too, and you can see these elegant looking lugs. It is not massive on the wrist, but it has good wrist presence.
However, when we look at the new style case, which is the super case with the maxi dial, we can see that those lugs are wider and that there's just more metal on the wrist. It just looks bigger. So now that you've had a look at that, you can see that this watch here has actually got greater wrist presence because there's more metal showing on the wrist on the one hand. On the other hand, this one is more elegant. So this is the super case, and this is the previous case. I don't know what they call it, just the regular oyster case, and this has been nicknamed the super case. Now there's another difference that's fairly notable in between these two watches too, and they're both black dial watches with their indices all look virtually the same, with the exception that the indices here are much larger. These round applied white gold rimmed indices are about double the size of these guys. And that triangular applied white gold rim index or indice at the 12 o'clock position is also a great bit larger. And also notice the hands are bigger, or a little bit wider, a little bit more noticeable, especially in the loom area here. This dial is called the maxi dial. It just presents a more visually noticeable read on the time. This is a more elegant watch. This is a brawnier watch. This is the super case with maxi dial, and this is the old style case and dial. I have to say they both have their charm, but I'm kind of stuck these days on wrist presence, and I feel like this watch gives you a little bit more wrist presence, while this one here is a marvel of technological engineering. So I'm extremely fond of both of them. Of course, they both have movable bezels, as I commented earlier. You can also really get a look here at the difference between a ceramic bezel and an aluminum insert bezel. The light plays much differently on this one. This guy will scratch and fade. This thing is never going to change. It's always going to look exactly the same. So I feel like this ceramic dial, because it's never going to show age, I feel it's a little bit like marrying a stripper with fake boobs she's going to, at 80 years old in the coffin, her boobs are going to be perfect and sticking straight up. She's never going to show her age, this watch, whereas this one will fade and scratch and age a bit more gracefully. But once again, they both have their charms. If you want perfect boobs sticking straight up in the coffin, you get this one. If you want a lady who's going to age gracefully, you get that one. So I have examples of both, but I have to say I really like I like the wrist presence here. I like the elegance there. What do you like better, guys? So the difference in the indices and in the hands and in the dials and in the nature of an aluminum bezel versus a ceramic bezel, that's all very dramatic between the 5-digit reference number Rolex and the 6-digit reference number Rolex. But there's another couple of differences that I think are also really important to note. Now, these are both oyster bracelets, very similar 3-piece links. Of course, this one is all matte finish or brushed, and this one has polished center links. But that's not the difference I want to talk about, because these are actually this is an old style oyster bracelet, and this is a new style. Here's the 5-digit reference number, the Sea Dweller, and I don't know, let's see if we can make this out. These center links, right in between there, this center link here, it's hollow. So if I bend this just so, yeah, you can see, let me get a little pointer here, that right there, that guy is hollow. See, you can see daylight right through it, okay? And so what that means is all of these center pieces right here are hollow, and therefore they don't weigh that much. So that affects the overall weight of this watch. Now, this is quite a heavy watch head because it's so chubby. It's really beautiful. Look at this. It's got a cool case back too. Writing. Not too many Rolexes have writing on the case back, but this guy does. Okay. However, the oyster bracelet is a little bit light because of those hollow center links. And this guy here, they deduced like that's just kind of was a chintzy way to go. So we'll get some focus here. These guys here are solid. So if we look in here, that's confusing the focus of the camera. So if we look at these, if we look at the space right here, that's the That's a solid center link right there. Okay, so this bracelet is therefore heavier and better constructed and not as much subject to stretch and wear over time. So that's a major improvement that we get with the solid center links. Now, let's look at the clasps quick as a final note. Here is your old style kind of wobbly stamped metal clasp. And here is your newer milled one. Now, if this were a Submariner, or I'm stuttering here. If it was a Submariner or a deep sea dweller, it would have, or any of their dive watches, it would have a glide lock clasp. But these guys are kind of compatible in that they're just simple closures. However, this one here, it's made out of, this is very thin, cheap stamped metal, formed in bent metal. And this is especially annoying. This is literally no better, this stamped metal clasp on a $6,000-$7,000 watch. This is no better than what you would get on a Seiko Monster. No better. That's a $200 watch. So this was kind of shameful that they did this, and they kept this far longer than they should have. But finally, they went to this guy here, which is a proper milled piece of metal with a milled clasp. I mean, this thing is much heavier duty, much thicker than it ever was, and you can now be proud of these clasps. But the previous generation were terrible. Now, this guy here does have some little micro adjustments. Very difficult, by the way. You can see there's some pins in there, spring bar pins, and you could move this whole unit backward and forward a little bit. So it has some micro adjustments there, and it has the Rolex half link system. See that little guy? It moves in, snaps down, or it pulls out and gives me a little bit of extra room here if my hand swells up. But it's not easy to do micro adjustments, whereas as shameful and crappy as that clasp is, at least it has the sort of micro adjustments that you can do with a toothpick. And never use metal when you're doing micro adjustments, or you'll scratch the heck out of your watch. You're way better off using a toothpick, and that is also true in this drilled lugs case. If you want to get in there and change the bracelet, I just use something like this. Anyway, there are some substantial improvements that have been made in these newer style Rolex watches, but these old guys, us old guys, we still have our charm too, don't we, fellas? Tell me in the comments which style case you like, the older 5-digit or the newer 6-digit reference number watch with the super case and maxi dial. This is Mark Goldberg from Mark Vlogs Watches. Tell me what you think of that.